Welcome to Young Adults Learning Evil, hosted by Nyrule. Young Adults Learning Evil is a gritty documentary podcast that explores the intersectionality of class, wealth, and race, and how it has played out over the past 400 years within a community. The podcast gives the world insight into how urban trauma affects a marginalized Black community inside one of America's first planned cities, New Haven, Connecticut. New Haven is also the home of one of the world's most prestigious and powerful institutions, Yale University. Subscribe to Young Adults Learning Evil on your favorite podcast platform. Here is your host, Nyrule.
Peace. My name is Nyrule, and you are listening to Young Adults Learning Evil. In this episode, we are going to explore Black governors in New England, but in particularly Connecticut. The Black population in Connecticut has always been considered progressive in comparison to the Black population in other New England colonies. Connecticut had more hostages and free Africans per capita than any other New England state, and they were intertwined into the daily life of the towns they reside in. An interesting tradition was created around 1750 in New London, Connecticut. After witnessing the elections of colonial governors, the Black residents chose and voted for their own Black leadership. This title became known as the Black governor, and in some circumstances, they were called kings. They fused European and African traditions in the voting ritual. Many African ethnic groups would have a designated leader or speak for the village. In the book African American Connecticut Explored, they explain how the hostages were taken from civilizations that had an organized political establishment. For example, the Ashanti that were situated in Ghana and West Africa had a council of the Queen, the chief executive, and the local governors. The Igbos, which were situated in modern-day Nigeria, had a Queen's Council. In the Hausas, which is located in Niger and Nigeria, they adopted Islamic political systems where they had emirates and sultanates. The African hostages and the freedmen continued their traditions, but they used the language of their captors. Many of the Black governors had direct roots to Africa. For example, there was a Black governor named Boston Nichols of Hartford. He was African born, as was Boston Trowtrow, or Norwich Trowtrow. And Trowtrow is an icon surname or play name that they give to people. There was a Black governor named Quash Freeman, who was a Black governor of Derby, and he was stolen from Africa as a child and held hostage in Derby. And Quash may have been a form of the word Kwesi, which is a Ghanaian name meaning born on Sunday. Governor Roswell Freeman, who sometimes was called Roswell Quash, son of Quash Freeman, would have been the firstborn of the generation in America. And we also have Quash Pierre, a West Indian born with mixed European and African ancestry, who was a Black governor in New Haven. Having the ability to pass down African culture through names was a tradition held by African hostages inside of the colonies. Some were able to retain knowledge of their cultures before at captivity and hold on to them throughout captivity. There is evidence of communities throughout the colonies, located in America, in the Caribbean, and South America, where Africans sought autonomy and independence. There were maroon communities, which consisted of escaped hostages in remote areas. They created their own political structures based off their African culture. The oldest recorded establishment is the Quilombo movement in Brazil, which dates all the way back to 1619. White observers of history wanted to dismiss the practice of black governors. They wanted to call it mimicry instead of seeing that they have their own value system that transcended their experience as hostages. And the acts weren't just mimicry. It was the black community asserting their own independence and sovereignty. The earliest recorded election in Connecticut was held by African hostages and freedmen in 1749. And the first elected governor was an African-born hostage named London, who was held hostage since he was a boy by a human trafficker named Colonel John Chester Sr., who was a member of the General Assembly and a judge of the Colonial County Court. Colonel Chester was one of the most important men in the colony at that time, which brought London prestige in his own right. The white citizens did not want to be bothered with the affairs of African hostages and freedmen, and they didn't want them inside of their courts, so they permitted them to handle their own law and order affairs. They also used the governor as a buffer, so any resentment towards law enforcement will be projected towards the governor instead of the greater white society that they represented. This was their method of preventing revolts like the ones that were occurring in the South and the Caribbean. Therefore, the governor had to be strong, trustworthy, just, and well respected in order to fit the role. Many of the black governors of the 18th century were held hostage by very prominent members of the Connecticut colony. Some thought that the black governor's proximity to white power is what got them elected, but further scrutiny shows that the people chose the man whose family and reputation and standing in the community was impeccable. The governor appointed his own lieutenants and deputies. The governor was also the intermediary between the black and white society, so the government was the spokesman for the entire black community. This is why the white power structure had an interest as to who is chosen as governor. The colony started to become more populated with more freedmen and runaway hostages, and they needed an intermediary to keep them at bay. Governors were put in charge of law enforcement, and they were the ones that served the penalties and punishments for the transgressors. That's why loyalty to the white establishment was an important factor. In my opinion, they gave African hostages and freedmen enough autonomy to not feel the need for having a violent insurrection that were occurring in the South and Caribbean colonies. The African hostages and freedmen would have a celebration with music, horses, and instruments, and they will be allowed to bring out their weapons like swords and guns while they sing and chant and march after the election. This procession was modeled off the Akan celebration or rituals of the Odiwara. Minus the animism and fetishism, the black community modified the celebration to fit into the Puritan society that they resided in. The white public saw it as a ridiculous spectacle initially. Then they became envious, and they created their own governor inaugural parade based off the customs of the African hostages. Now that we know what the black governors are, let's look at how this title and role interacted with the dynamics of New Haven. Now, the black governors has reached New Haven County in the 18th century, but in my opinion, once it reached New Haven, the city, the white elite sought to discredit and destroy the popular tradition. I say that because the New Haven governorship was a true beacon of black empowerment and sovereignty. New Haven, with its intellectual institutions and industries, produced William Lansing, a man I like to refer to as one of the black founding fathers of America. Rumored to be a fourth-generation freedman, Lansing earned the title of king a decade before he was elected as governor. Lansing was an engineer, and he is best known for the expansion of Long Wharf to become the longest wharf in the world at that time. He hired his family and black freedmen primarily to perform the jobs that he was given. He used his profits to buy real estate to create housing for a black community, where they were consolidated power with other prominent African freedmen and hostages. He also didn't persecute his people with the strict puritanical values held by the dominant white culture. The white power elites in New Haven disapproved of Lansing, allowing the escaped hostages from the South and to free African sailors to sing, dance at parties in Lansing's neighborhood. Even so, Lansing was elected the black governor in 1825, while he was establishing the first black church and creating African improvement societies to educate the black people with newly found freedom, so they will be able to read the Bible and learn from instructions and can be viable parts of the society. These actions, along with Lansing's wealth, reputation, and admiration of the black community, made him a target of the white power elite of New Haven. He was empowering the community instead of acting as their proxy. So this started a smear campaign on William Lansing, where they even actually took out ads in the paper to tell lies and give him a bad character. The smear campaign took its toll on William Lansing's governorship, and after accusations and arrests, he lost his title. The elite may have felt threatened by Lansing's autonomy to white people and would have favored a hostage who was still bound to the white power elite. The next New Haven governor was a mixed African hostage from the West Indies named Quash Pierre. Now, New Haven has always had a West Indian population due to the frequent trade from the port. Many notable West Indian Africans that left an impact on New Haven history. Quash Pierre was one of them. He was liked by the black community for his temperament, and the white establishment liked him because he knew his role. Upon governorship, Quash bore a cane with a solid gold head with his name engraved in it as a symbol of his royal status, which follows the African traditions. When he fell out of favor with the white elite, his cane was mysteriously found in a chicken coop, and Quash was eventually arrested for burglary, and the community stripped him of his governorship. They immediately elected Charles Thomas. Now, Charles Thomas was also an enslaved person who worked as a driver for a wealthy merchant family in New Haven. Now, in my opinion, the New Haven elite preferred to have a hostage as a governor as opposed to a freedman. Even though slavery was quote-unquote illegal at that time, people were still bonded to their employers. Charles Thomas' reign as governor wasn't very noteworthy. He took reign during a time that racial division and animosity was reaching an apex in the city. I couldn't find any evidence linking him to any of the abolitionists in the city, so I will assume the white elite that he was linked to may have been promoters of colonization. After 4 years as governor, Thomas Johnson was stripped of his title, also because he was arrested. But for him, it was for being in a gambling spot where people were playing poker. So the fake Puritan outrage and the unpopular trend of self-determined black people were the factors that led to Charles Thomas to be the last of the New Haven black governors. The practice stayed in New Haven County. The seat of the black governor stayed in Derby and in Seymour until it was ended in 1855. That is the end of our quick profile of black governors. Check out the episode on William Lansing where we go more in depth. Join the Facebook group Young Adults Learning Evil Podcast so we can continue these discussions. Peace.
Thank you for listening to Young Adults Learning Evil. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Visit our Patreon page and learn how you can support and stay in tune with the movement. Till next time, peace.